Although I have to note that my supervisor over in Eugene says, "You did that. You introduced yourself." It's like I did. So, puzzled. And, I do. I confess to being slightly puzzled about why I'm here. So let me start once again over by saying thank you, Sue Theaker, for that wonderful land acknowledgement, gratitude, reciprocity. Thank you for the reading, Sally. I think you chose it because I didn't. Otherwise, hello, thank you. And thank you, Christine, for encouraging us to try what is not a simple hymn, maybe, but is a really compelling hymn. At least I find it so. Maybe you do too. Blue Boat Home has always been a grounding song for me when I sense the approach of, or when I find myself in the middle of, white water, yikes. It's like I'm on a blue boat. I'm going. It's okay. I'm home. I'm right here. So, maybe this introduction. Okay. So I'm kind of shy and pretty unobtrusive, right? So much so that I can probably get through more than a year as your intern minister without actually being noticed, right? That's me all over to a T, right? That's me. Okay, so, it's the same me that it's been since at least 9:23 this morning. But perhaps this will be a welcome change of pace, maybe. One of my writing mentors, the Warm Springs former poet laureate of Oregon, Elizabeth Woody, once suggested that the word responsibility could be understood as responding to one's abilities. She does that. She condenses words from sprawly, ropey language into these intense points of brilliance. A little goes a very long way. Responsibility as responding to our own abilities, and if it's not in our toolkit, that is not our job, right? Or we have to skill up really quick if nobody else does. But I was able to say yes, so I did. It doesn't require that one goes solo. So I'm hoping that you will help me out here today as we go through this and say, okay, Jesse, enough. As a matter of fact, I'd like to suggest a new practice. There was a minister I very much like, Meg Barnhouse. I think she's retired now, but when she was at a congregation in one of the Carolinas, I can't remember which, she said, I have this great, she was doing a writing workshop, a spiritual writing workshop, and she said, I have this great congregation. I say these things, and from that corner over here, I hear, hallelujah. And from that corner over here, I hear, or not. And it's like, that's a healthy congregation right there. I'm just here to say, we don't all have to say the same things. So, and Lydia, and no, it's not Lydia this morning. It is Jim Henry, who's on tech. Let me not forget to thank Jim. So we're all here with all these people and experiences and influences that have affected each of us in this list, alone and in combination with others. Not to mention, let us not forget the authors and composers of all the pieces we've read and sung this morning. They're here too with us, right? Their gifts and everything that has influenced them and their ancestors and everything that's influenced and activated them. You see how this is going? Because of course, there's another thing, the beauty of this space, right? The beauty and the serenity and the complications and the resolution, hopefully, of those complications and of the space in which we are sitting, which is a serious task, to keep a beautiful space. And it's the product of so many other hands that are here among us, right? Hearts and logisticators and pockets, and I won't try to mention all of them. I won't because I can't. I wasn't even here, but the long list would certainly include the esteemed Deborah Jordan with her feeling for beauty and color and balance, along with at least 3 different boards of trustees, right, that redid all this, maybe 4, I don't know, during the pandemic, and lots of others. So as it turns out, it's a very crowded space up here this morning, right? Because there's all of that. Well, there's all of that happening. There's all of that resonating in these spaces. I don't know if you can feel it, but I can. Well, I can't feel all of it, but I can feel some of it. And I can certainly feel you sitting here and standing and walking and playing, bored, attentive, wandering, thinking about leaving, with all of your histories and relationships and preconceptions and curiosities and influences that you and I bring to this moment between and among us, not to mention your ancestors and so on back. Or as Rumi has very succinctly put it, this flow is so all around, which of course is an English interpretation by people who, et cetera, of these 13th century words that perhaps originally emerged or coalesced as a thought that was spoken or perhaps penned in maybe Persian from Rumi's own deep well of influences. So you see how all this goes. This morning is, and also mostly isn't, all about me. It's about all of us and all of that, and all of everything, and the peoples and experiences and the influences that we're bringing right here, right now, today, that, as I like to say, have both formed and deformed us along the way. So, a very crowded place today here, which just appears to our hurried and harried self to be somehow individualistic, a collection of individuals, which is frankly hilarious, right? I mean, I find this hilarious. It's like, we think we're individuals. Hello, were any of you born? You didn't create yourself, right? Okay, so for one, there's at least your mother and more than likely a father of some sort, okay? You know, in modern life can be very complicated, right? You know, and I wish I could say all of this musically instead of in words. So here's me. Music would be ever so much more easy to listen to, as, for instance, Edward Elgar in his Enigma variations, which he thought of as sketches or portraits sometimes of his friends and relationships. Because music, all kinds of music, has been a primary, timeless, formative experience for me all of my life. I say this not as a musician, but one who is routinely caught up and willingly abducted in the throes of various musics. I mean, oh my goodness, Judy sent me a link to a music video last night or yesterday that I opened last night, and it derailed me for like hours, because it's so good. It's, the music is just astounding. Leon Oden Jr., right? He played, Leslie Oden Jr. He played Aaron Burr in Hamilton. And he's singing the thoughts of this amazing composer who I had never heard of and can't remember her name, about what Obama might be thinking about in this moment, but wouldn't ever say. And musically, you have to hear it. Leslie Odom Jr. It's called Seriously. So, Anyway, the various musics in my life, they don't just include music. And it's a thing of beauty when the music and the lyrics go together, which is one of the reasons I loved Hamilton. Found out I didn't much approve of Hamilton, which I didn't know, because, I'm a scientist, not a historian. But man, I love that music. But there's also other kinds of musics, right? There are the usual suspects of bird songs and rushing rivers and chorus frogs, but there are also sounds that it can take me all night and several different partners in investigation to unravel. The most astonishing of which was a gaggle of earthworms in northern Wisconsin, which I suppose were night crawlers because it was night, munching so loudly in such staggering numbers that it could be heard for tens of yards away. And I'm telling you, this was a group of ecologists, and I kept going, what is that? Do you know what that is? And I said, no, have a beer. And it's like, no, I really want to know what that is, So I finally get somebody, and we go around with our flashlights, nothing. Are they frogs? No. What are they? Is this leaves? What is this? Took us probably 6 hours. Earthworms munching. This is an astonishing world, really, right? And yes, they are invasive, right? Because, Wisconsin used to be covered by an ice sheet. So basically, you can look at it like everything is invasive in the last 20,000 years if you were under an ice sheet, right? And they're chowing down on the forest soils that have been built up over thousands of years. So that leads me to wonder, but see, that's another trail. That's a different trail. Music is why I mostly hate machines, which don't contribute organic musicality to my existence. They thump and clatter and hiss and moan and whoosh and hum, and all of that shuts me right down. So, all of this is probably part of one of the key lessons I'm learning from one of my Lakota teachers these years, as he patiently and somewhat now increasingly more often than not impatiently continues to insist to us, this small group of UUs and Veterans for Peace, that what is needful in order to move forward together is less about what and more about how. Less about what we think and more about how we think. And we meet once or twice a week. They've been meeting for probably 10 years. I've been a member for about 5 years. Once or twice a week, and boy, do we struggle. And ironically, that statement about what versus how is a what. Right? That right there is a what, which is the point that is not lost on him, I might say. The point being that the perspective of, say, a Lakota person, for example, is not just different than the perspective of a settler colonialist. It's not like just among us settler colonialists always arguing that what the elephant is from our individual perspective over here is different than what the elephant is from somebody else's perspective over there. Touching the trunk, I'm touching the left leg, right? It's not like that. It's more to do with why some of us casually assume it's an elephant, okay? Or really any kind of static it, when really all things are mostly empty space, right? With electrons circling protons and neutrons. We, and I don't mean identities, I'm not talking about identities here, I mean the ways all of us are now being carefully programmed to experience the world as a collection of things when it's actually a collection of empty space, right? Part of this is probably because of the language we use. It's English. It's a thing-heavy language. It is based in nouns. When you want to start learning it, you say, oh, table, bell, Jesse sometimes. But as many of us are aware, there are many languages that are based in verbs, okay? When I was working with the Inupiat people up north in northern Alaska, Inupiat peoples and organizations, I was a scientist leading a project on long-range transport of Arctic contaminants across the poles through the oceans and whatnot. And boy, I tell you what, the word contaminants was almost impossible to translate, because of course we had a translator, because we wanted to talk to the elders. In part because in Inupiat, as in many other verb-based languages, the names for things change depending on their relationship with each other. So a table is not just a table, it's the thing that holds the thing that when we eat this kind of thing, we can use. But it might have another name if we're eating a different kind of thing, for example. I mean, and what do I know? I don't speak Inupiat. But that's the basic kind of premise. We do verbs, my translator, Masak Akpik, explained. But nouns are really complicated. And you know what? The reason, and then our Canadian colleagues, they're so brilliant. They're tens of years ahead of us in all of this cultural stuff. They got the brilliant idea. They said, first of all, they got the brilliant idea, hey, we need translators. It's like, yeah, okay. I needed that in order to convince my boss that I could spend money on a translator. Really? Please give me a break. But the other thing that was true was that the Canadians said, no, wait. Now we have to hire somebody else that's bilingual to back translate to see what was being said. And when they did that, they found that the word for contaminant was translated as poison. So here were the Canadian scientists running around saying, there's poison in your food, but it's pretty low level, so don't worry about it. It's like, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Of course people are going to worry about it. So all of this is to say that people think so differently. We don't know. We don't have a clue. I mean, I don't even have a clue about my own family, right? Each of us is born in a different family. Speaking of which, let's remember again the land acknowledgement. But what does it mean? Because it's not about ownership, right? It's not about who used to own the land and now we own it. That's not what it's about. That's an imperial concept. Thank you, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, and especially thanks to Rome, okay? That's an imperial concept, ownership of land. What does the phrase traditional homelands actually mean to Sayusla, is that better? Thank you. People, or even to one Sayusla person, as if one person could be magically extricated from their entire web of influences as well as communities and thousands of years of ancestors, which they cannot be. And if you actually think about it, it's a horrible and violent reality to try and do, to extricate somebody like that. Nevertheless, that's what Western cultures, broadly painted, try to do. Well, I have no idea what that might mean to one or more Sayusla persons. Maybe that would be a question to invite discussion about some Sunday morning from one or more Sayusla persons. So, okay, this is getting boring, right? Because, all my life I've been pushing at these kinds of things. I started life as an ecologist because I began growing up in New York City and realized that someone, not talking about anybody in particular, had made a terrible mistake, tragic, or maybe it was a profound learning experience, right? Being in New York City. I just wanted to be able to go into the woods and understand what was happening. That was the whole thing. That was my gig. A couple of years into graduate school, I realized that graduate school was kind of a very strange path to that end. And I could just go live in a cabin in the woods, But by then I had so much invested that it seemed silly to stop. And so 6 years, later, I'm finishing. I never really thought about careers. Really? You never really thought about how to make a living? No, I did not. Can you spell privilege? All right? And then suddenly I had a career. And then suddenly I lost it. Whew. And then I had it again, and it multiplied. And I struggled with it. And I loved some of the work, but I hated the job, just like so many of us. And then 15 or so years into Unitarian Universalism, which is a whole nother long story, I accidentally on purpose signed up for one course at our then Berkeley-based UU seminary, and I talked about that briefly last week. Educating to create just and sustainable communities to counter oppression. And I learned about counterpoint melodies and amplifying a counterpoint melody, or maybe one particular melody. And then I started to contemplate, I don't know, the nature of reality, the ruach, the breath, the wind, the breath of spirit, the way spirit is breathing us, the breath dancing us, breathing spirit, the interbreathing of all that is. Dancing those dances, much like water dances with water, with air, with earth, even with fire. So all of this is just talking. It's just mind talking. And it is a bit boring, really, even though it's also really interesting. One thing becomes clear to me when I bore myself like this is I just love the earth. It's freely given with all of its complexities and beauties and strangenesses. This planet, these beings, some of whom I ingest, millions of whom are continually ingesting me, I am in love. I am in love with this planet. This blue boat that's suspended in space, this blue dot, it's my one true physical home this time around. So now I've turned to body, right? I've stopped about the mind, and now I'm talking about the body. And whitewater. Gorgeous, glorious. And if you're careless or you don't have skills, potentially deadly. In many ways, like many of you may be, I consider it nothing short of miraculous that I have survived to this age. I mean, when I started to write this, I started to go through some of my stories about all the times when I could so easily have not made it. And I thought, that's just depressing. Don't do that. But, both in seriously urban and in seriously wilderness settings, that's been true in one way or another. And yet, I have to acknowledge that I've had the incredible privilege of being essentially the only child of a family who loved me. That's not necessarily common. Who always believed in me, who almost never physically abused me. Right there, my precious parents gave me the thing, the one thing that of course isn't a thing, that's always free, and yet it's rare. Why is that? And you know what that thing is, right? What is that thing? Yeah, right, it's love. Love is a verb, because it's about relationship. Much as we struggled in various pairwise combinations, I never doubted that my family loved me, that I was loved. I did doubt that maybe they didn't love each other, and that was very difficult. But I didn't doubt ever as a child that I was loved. So imagine my surprise when I discovered that people who didn't even know me really, really hated me. Really hated me. I mean, like, hated me from deep in their souls. Simply because from a very early age, I only swooned over girls, even though I had a girl's body. This has been a central reality of my embodied existence, but of course, you see, it wouldn't have been a big deal had not somebody made it a big deal. I mean, it's not a big deal. You love who you love. But, you know, it's been made a big deal, and now it's a really big deal, and now it's an even bigger big deal since I realized very recently, well, like within the last few years, that there's a better language to express my gender identity. I've always kind of gone with, you know, she, woman, I've got a woman's body, and it's like, well, okay, that's weird. But the way this culture defines female, woman, does not fit for me on any level. Does not fit. Many people are now adopting they for just this reason, because neither does the way this culture defines male or men fit for me. It does not. It absolutely does not. Now, people are really different about this. So some people, it does make sense. The poles do make sense for them, and bless them, because life is easier. Of course, that's only true if you're born with that body. If you're crossing over, see what I'm saying about it's a big deal. It's a big, big deal. And it's so, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. But back to binaries. Binaries don't work for me on any level. Good, evil, you know, black, white, I don't know, there are millions. Happy, sad, you know, they just don't work for me, because in my world, everything's a continuum. Everything. It's like you say this and I say that. Okay, so maybe we're both right. That's what I learned as a scientist. It's like usually the things we fought about were because we were looking at special cases, different ones. You know, we were both right. So that's what I do. Okay, Enneagram, I'm told I'm a 9. If you know the Enneagram. I'm a Gemini, if you do astrology. If you do Myers-Briggs, I am an INTP, which last time I checked, which was a while ago, it always sounds like a fuel additive to me, you know. But anyway, so now you know all about me, right? Because you've got all the typologies. Check. But here's the thing where it gets really complicated, this continuum stuff. When I became a Muslim and a Sufi of the Chishti lineage living in Philomath, it put me in an actually irresolvable situation with attending the very conservative local mosque, because you see, I'm not allowed to sit downstairs with the men, I don't know where I put my hijab, but I am so exquisitely uncomfortable to dress in a hijab and to sit with the women, even if I just wore a hat. I mean, it is painful. I feel like an imposter, you see. So maybe that's why I feel like an imposter in many places in my life. And frankly, I no longer go to women's retreats either. And it explains why I have a long history of feeling very uncomfortable in women's gatherings, always. Very uncomfortable. Unless they are open and welcoming to lesbians, and there were enough of us to have a mini community within the community. And this is another really important point. 1, 2, 3, not enough. Sorry, there has to be some kind of critical mass, okay? There has to be a mini community that you can talk to, that you can relate with, that understands what your struggles are within this larger community. And so it's getting late, and I've been going on and on, but where I want to end is that these are some of the many reasons why I've been a Unitarian Universalist for 3 decades. Love, even though I sometimes, and sometimes often, lose touch with it, and sometimes for many weeks in a row. Love is the beating heart of this faith community. It lives in the promises that we make to each other. That's where it lives. And so I'm kind of, sensitive about promises. If I make a promise, oh, Lord, help me if I forget that I've made a promise, and I do. I forget, because the human thing. But I do my very best to hold up my end. I really do. I might miss the mark, but I try. Maybe you can relate to some of this. I hope so. I hope so. I lived once with a person who was perfect for 6.5 years. Do I need to mention that it was an emotionally abusive relationship and that I was complicit in that? I was complicit, and that it had a really bad end. Okay? So, perfection, it is said, is a tool of white supremacy. You're never, ever, ever, ever going to be good enough. See? So suck it up. And I'll tell you what to do. Okay? But the descant to that song, that song we did last week, Come, Come, whoever you are, there's a descant that says, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, always come, 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 because it's about the love. Of course you're going to break your vows. I'm going to break my vows. I'm going to break my promises. Every once in a while, I will do so deliberately, probably, because there's a need. Hopefully that's not too often. Very Sufi song. There's a reason why Muslims pray 5 times a day, or as in the case with original nations and peoples and many other people too, praying with every breath. Beautiful practice to try to live your life as a prayer. So wrapping up now, I also want to acknowledge this business of having a mini community of people of your group within a larger gathering that maybe you're trying to think of as your group, but it's not really exactly. It's a great example of the concept offered by the amazing UU, Paula Cole Jones, who's a lay leader at the Washington, D.C. All Souls congregation. She gave an invited lecture at one of our General Assemblies, our national meetings a few years ago, and introduced the idea of Unitarian Universalism as a community of communities. That was very clarifying. And in fact, if you think about it, pretty much any group, if it's big, is a community of communities. It doesn't make any sense to talk about Christianity. Christianities. There are a gazillion different Christianities. There's a gazillion different Islams and Sufisms and Jewish practices and Hinduism. Hinduism isn't even a religion. That was something the British put on top of people who worshipped in India because, they all look pretty similar, right? The practices and stuff, so we'll call them Hindus. By coming together as a community of communities, we can keep our relationships and our tender places and our love alive through many fires, many fires. And we're having many fires right now. Community of communities, find your peeps. Don't assume that means you have to change communities. You don't. You just need to find your peeps. And then try to work within and among, because as flawed and as foibled as we are, the central part of our faith is love. 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 For me, a lifelong outlier virtually everywhere I've traveled, to you, outliers, inliers, whoever you are, love. Assalamu alaikum. And thank you for your extended attention.